Greetings ladies and gentlefish, and welcome to another tank review. This time we are taking a look at the tier 9 British heavy tank, the Conqueror. As usual, we're going to go with a little bit of a historical rundown. So this machine was a culmination of different design proposals for a universal tank, as it was referred to at the time, which were a whole series of tanks designed to be using the same chassis. So they would have common chassis, common components, be easy to produce, etc. And so you have designs such as the A45, what would become the Conqueror. These were machines that, while there were copies manufactured, they never actually entered wide-scale production. The Conqueror, however, was the final, if you will, development of that line, and this did enter production, and it entered production in the form it did because of the IS-3. Essentially, towards the end of the Second World War and in the years immediately following it, the Allies got to have a good look at the Soviet IS-3, which was a very, very menacing looking machine, low profile, clearly a large caliber gun in the turret, armour that was well angled. It looked like a damn scary machine, and at this point relationship between the Western and the Eastern Allies in the Second World War had kind of soured, and we were reaching the stage where the West and the East really didn't trust each other, and the Western Allies were very much looking at the IS-3 as a threat at this point. In response, the British came to the conclusion that the Centurion tank, which was their main battle tank at the time, or their universal tank at the time, would not really have been able to stand up to the IS-3. Certainly not with the 17-pounder the tank originally came with, but even not really with the 20-pounder. And so they decided that they needed something a bit beefier. Stepped forward the Conqueror. This thing was mounted, as I say, on this universal chassis, but it had a dirty great big turret sticking on top, designed to mount a 120mm gun that would be perfectly capable of horribly mashing any IS-3s that it needed to. And the idea would be that the Centurions would form this little battle line, and they'd engage the IS-3s, and then you'd have Conquerors sitting some way off in the distance going pew pew, killing IS-3s with great abandon, and that would solve the problem. The tank actually had a funny little used cartridge disposal system designed by, it was like a cigarette company or something weird, or was it something like that. I can't remember the full details, but it had this weird system that was designed to get rid of the spent cartridges automatically and improve the rate of fire of this tank, but in practice it never really worked. As it turned out, the IS-3, while it was certainly not a bad machine, was not quite as dangerous as the Allies had feared. The welds on it tended to be a bit dubious, and in practice the 20-pounder on the Centurion would probably have been up to the task of taking the machine out, but nonetheless, at this point the Brits had the Conqueror, for the time pretty good frontal armour, and a very, very powerful gun. Production of this machine continued until the late 50s. At this point, the Centurion had been upgraded to mount a 105mm gun, and the Conqueror, there wasn't really much point to it anymore. With the Centurion able to mount a larger caliber gun anyway, there was no need to really have a separate tank with a big gun in the turret, and so this became the last real heavy tank that the British produced, manufactured, and put into service. So there we go, history for you. What do we get in game? Well, this thing sits up here at tier 9. And some of you may well have heard the British heavy tank line is a bit of a grind. And, well, they're not wrong really. And the Conqueror at tier 9 has an annoying habit of taking many of the lessons you've learnt at previous tiers and chucking them out the window. So, let's start off by having a quick look at the tech tree, and you'll start hopefully to see what I mean. So, the British heavy tank line starts off, as many lines do, at tier 1. All the British lines start off at tier 1 with the medium 1. Who cares about it? It's a pretty dodgy machine. We're not going to spend too much time on it. You then go up here. Tiers 2 and 3 are a pair of tanks, medium tanks produced between the wars. They had tissue paper for armour, sort of 6-pounder, 2-pounder guns, things like that. In game, they're not very good. They get penetrated by anything that so much as sneezes at them. Most people try and get through them as quickly as possible. At tier 4, you have the Matilda, which was a tank the British used throughout the Second World War, and without going into too much detail on it, it is a good tank in this game, heavily armoured, with a very good 2-pounder gun, if rather on the sluggish side. And that, for many people, is the highlight of the British heavy tank line for some while to come. Tiers 5 to 8, you have the Churchills. These things are characterised by being very slow, generally having pew-pew guns, and having armour that is often not as good in practice as it appears on paper. Churchill 1, Churchill 7, Black Prince, these are all very incremental designs, being slightly better than the predecessor, but you're not quite sure if they're good enough to be a whole tier higher. And they're often quite painful tanks to get through. But they're all about the armour. Then you get to the Carnarvon at tier 8, which takes loads of that armour, chucks it in the bin, gives you 10 degrees of gun depression, a 20-pounder gun, it's still a pew-pew gun, it's still got low alpha damage, and says play this thing like a medium tank that isn't quite as fast. And so you play that and you get through it, and you still wish you had a gun that actually hit for a respectable amount of damage, but you never get that at tier 8. Then you get to tier 9 with the Conqueror, and suddenly, oh my god, you have a gun that will actually do something. This 120mm gun, we will talk about it in a bit later, but it has 400 alpha damage, which is mind-blowing for this stage in your development down the British heavy tank lines, where you have put up with so many 75 and 76mm guns. It's infuriating. Even the 83mm gun on the Carnarvon only hits for 230. However, this should come with a health warning. Whilst 400 alpha damage for the Conqueror is a nice step up from its predecessors, 400 alpha damage is still joint lowest at tier 9. So you're not going to outtrade a T10, or you're not going to outtrade a Type 4 heavy, or whatever. You get the idea. The alpha damage is still relatively low. But just to quickly mention the grind on this tank, it's been relatively painful up until tier 9. So what do you actually get to work with? Well, you are stuck with the upgraded turret from the Carnarvon as your stock turret. And basically, unfortunately, the stock Conqueror is essentially a Carnarvon at tier 9, and that's not very good news, because the Carnarvon even at tier 8 wasn't fantastic. Have a quick look at the engines. The Carnarvon gets you this 750 horsepower engine. There are so many engines on this tank. The Carnarvon also gets you this 810 horsepower engine. As for the Rolls-Royce Griffin, however, that is available from the Conqueror, this tank, the Centurion Mark 7 if you've gone down the British medium lines, the tier 10 heavy, but that's not very helpful, and the Conway, the tier 9 British tank destroyer. So if you haven't played the other tech lines, you won't have this engine already unlocked. And actually, if you find yourself not liking this tank, you don't need that engine to get the FV215B. And actually, the FV215B, the tier 10, unlocks that engine for you automatically anyway. So you could actually skip out on this engine if you wanted. But if you want to try and get the most out of the Conqueror, I would recommend you try and get it. But stock configuration, you have the Rolls-Royce Meteor with 810 horsepower, which is not too bad. Radios, I mean, frankly, who cares? But you have the top radio from the Carnarvon, and you have the 20-pounder B-barrel. Yay! 226 pen, 230 alpha. Who really cares? And so as I say, the stock Conqueror is basically a Carnarvon, but at tier 9, which is a bit problematic. So you want to prioritise, 1, the turret. The upgraded turret does a couple of things, not all of them good. 1, it significantly increases the frontal armour on it. That is good. 2, it nerfs your gun depression. That is bad. And honestly, if you're still using the B-barrel, the 20-pounder, you may not necessarily want to use this turret, because 10 degrees of gun depression is your friend. But you need this turret for the moneymaker, the top gun. The turret is 28,300 XP, the gun is 60,000 XP, basically it's 90,000 XP to have access to the top gun. If you want to throw the experience for the engine in as well, you're looking at about 130, 140,000 experience to make this tank not a Carnarvon, and that's painful. Sorry, the grind on this tank kinda sucks, even if you have tried to grind out everything before and have as many modules available as possible. The grind is still kinda sucky. So, when you are fully upgraded and you finally got to that stage, what do you actually get? Well, we will mention the gun in a moment, but just to say for now, 400 alpha, 259 pen, 7 degrees of gun depression, which is kind of irritating, but you end up working with it. The gun is the good point about this tank. 1950 hit points, which for a tier 9 heavy tank is nothing particularly special. It's pretty much indicative of all the tier 9 heavy tanks. Your hull armor, we'll talk more about this later, but it is a Carnarvon. At tier 9, your hull armor is not good. 130, but that's only on the upper front plate, and you don't have the 10 degrees of gun depression to allow you to angle it back that far, so your hull is basically cheese. Turret, 254, well angled. The front of the turret, the only places realistically you're going to get penned are possibly the cupola, someone who shoots straight down the centre of the gun mantlet, and high caliber premium rounds. The front of the turret on this tank is pretty damn good. Mobility, it's a 66 ton tank. Now you don't get the armour that you might expect from such a tank, but I'm afraid a 120mm gun and this turret do weigh quite a lot. 950 horsepower though, so actually you have a specific power of 14 horsepower per ton, which for a heavy tank is pretty respectable. Now, your top speed of 34 kilometers an hour isn't the best, but the high engine power does mean that you move around the battlefield at a respectable rate of knots. No one cares about concealment, it's a heavy tank. Spotting, base view range of 400 meters is very respectable. You can buff that up a little bit, of course, depending on what equipment you want to choose, and the signal range is awesome, but no one cares. So let's have a look at these guns. Right, I am not going to talk about the 20 pounders. You use them if you have to. If you don't have to and you've got the experience, unlock the 120mm, use that. So let's have a look at the 120mm gun. This gun is good, but not perfect. 120mm gun, 5.71 rounds per minute rate of fire base, which is actually pretty good. 259 penetration with armor piercing rounds, so that's basically 260 pen, very nice. 400 alpha damage, as I mentioned, that is nice to have, but the Soviets, for example, if you want to, you can mount a 122mm gun on the KV-85 at tier 6 and get 390 alpha. It's taken the British until tier 9 to catch up with that, at which point the T10 has 440. So, but anyway, 440 alpha is nice to have, and combined with the rate of fire means that the Conqueror actually gets pretty good DPM for a tier 9 heavy tank. 0.33 dispersion at 100 meters, it's an accurate gun, a 1.9 second aim time, and I'm not going to get into it now in huge detail, but good bloom stats, good aiming stats on the gun. This gun is very good at firing on the move, this gun is pretty accurate, it's a good gun to use. It just is. So that's definitely good. If you want to fire a little bit of APCR, which is your premium round, you can, of course. 326 penetration. Not that you really need it that much. What is interesting about this gun though is HE rounds. They're British. British have a habit of using HESH rounds, and on this gun you get non-premium HESH rounds, so 515 alpha damage and an unusually high 120mm of penetration, which means while you're not going to be using these rounds all the time, they are effective against more targets than you might expect. 120 penetration, that's most light tanks, a number of medium tanks, even some heavy tanks if you catch them from the side or the rear. So the high explosive rounds on this tank are pretty darn good. One thing I should note here is your ammo supply. You get 35 rounds of ammunition. It's not great. Now the gun is fairly accurate, but even so, 35 rounds of ammunition you can burn through relatively quickly. Crew skills, equipment, etc. Well, ammunition wise, I've got 3 rounds of high explosive, 3 of APCR and 29 armor piercing. The armor piercing rounds are good enough that you don't have to fire much APCR, and the high explosive rounds, while they're good, they are still situational. So go figure. I have your standard set of consumables here. First aid kit, repair kit, fire extinguisher. You of course could swap these out for some others if you wanted. Pudding and tea is of course an option. You definitely want the small repair kit. The Conqueror does get ammo racked, and if you're caught from the rear you can catch fire, and you kind of want the small first aid kit. So really the only thing I might do is swap them out for large versions and an automatic fire extinguisher. That is a more expensive option of course, but that's up to you. Vertical stabilizer, you're good at firing on the move, let's make you better. Large caliber tank gun rammer, 10% extra DPM is good regardless of how you look at it, so you want that. Last piece of equipment, up to you. I've gone for vents, which is pretty standard for heavy tanks for me. You could go with coated optics if you wanted to. You've got a 400 meter base view range, that wouldn't be a bad idea. None of the other bits of kit are worth considering. So vents or optics, choose your poison. Crew skills, this is my British heavy tank crew. They're relatively well skilled. You want all the good stuff, sixth sense, repairs, safe storage, because this thing does get ammo racked if people get to shoot at your hull, which makes you kind of sad. Brothers in arms, sure. Things like that, you know. Have I mentioned repairs? I can't remember. Smooth ride, snapshot, all the standard good stuff. Nothing particularly surprising about crew skills here, if we're going to be very honest. So how do you actually want to play this tank? Well, you have terrible hull armor, good turret armor, mediocre gun depression, and a good gun. Essentially, you don't... What I see a lot of people do is saying, oh, the Conqueror, it's a sniper tank, so I'm going to sit on the red line and snipe people with my big gun. Don't do that. Just don't. No, the armor isn't fantastic, but if you're top tier, for example, you still have more hit points than most of the other tanks on your tier. You should be using your armor effectively to bounce stuff, and that means covering up that hull and only exposing your turret. So use that 7 degrees of gun depression as much as you can. Use any wrecks or anything you can to cover your hull and just poke your turret over the top. Your gun is perfectly capable of hitting weak spots. Don't be afraid to fire and pull back. The gun is accurate on the move. You want to deny people easy shots at you. And hopefully the gameplay I'm going to show you is going to give you an idea of how you can make best use of this tank. So let's stop waffling and have a look at it. Right then, module locations. Unsurprisingly, from the front of the tank you have the driver sitting in the hull, as you might expect. Worth noting, lower front plate of this tank, like the Carnarvon, like the Centurion, like a lot of the other high tier British tanks, made of ammo racks, so you do not want to get shot in that lower front plate. That would make you a very sad panda. Nothing too surprising in the turret, of course. You're going to have a gunner, you're going to have a loader, you're going to have a commander, and the bum of this tank is made of fuel tanks and engines, so it will set on fire. See, more engines right there. From the right hand side of this tank, although they don't show it here, from both sides of the tank, that frontal ammo rack you can hit. Again, bum of the tank made of engines and fuel tanks. Crew up in the turret, commander back here, gunner over here, loader was on the other side, and it's worth noting that it's a fairly large artillery target. But really the thing module wise that is most noteworthy about the tank is the frontal ammo rack. God, I hate that frontal ammo rack. Here we are then, the armor of the Conqueror. Let's not dwell on this. Rear armor, 38mm, 70mm. I mean, the rear and sides of the hull is HE penetration territory. The rear of the turret can shrug off most HE rounds, but AP rounds will just go straight through. Side, very, very similar story. For the rear half of the turret, the front half of the turret, I wouldn't bother shooting at. You can just shoot it in the rear of the turret. Much, much better choice. From the front, the lower front plate is, yes, you are reading that correctly, it is effectively 113mm thick. You can penetrate this with lower tier light tanks. The lower front plate of this tank is utter garbage. Upper front plate is around about 200mm thick. If you're using a little bit of gun depression, you can maybe squeeze that up to about 210, maybe 220 if you're really lucky. But at tier 9, it's not up to much. Expect your hull to be penetrated. Turret, however, different story. Commander's hatch cupola thing up here, even here you can see 234mm of effective armour. Now, if someone is shooting straight and they are aiming, let's see if I can just show you, they are aiming for this yellow section, you can get about 120mm of effective armour, but if it hits this green bit, that's gone up to 260. So, shots at the cupola can go through, but they're not always going to do so. Sides of the turret cheeks, well, there's 370, 452, 344. Sections down here that are only 260, 270, 280mm thick. And if we have a look at the gun mantlet itself, 562, 560, 267. Now there is of course going to be a hole back here that they've physically put the gun through. That's kind of the point of a gun mantlet, to cover up that hole. So where you have that hole, the armour will be a bit thinner, but even then it's still easily 250mm of effective armour and upwards. If you have a look just here, this section of the turret, strictly speaking, you could probably try and claim it's kind of a weak point, but I mean, everything's relative, I guess. It's still 250mm of effective armour. Now, and even if we look at the turret roof, actually, some tanks tend to have really thin turret roofs that people will just go through. This armour, well, yeah, maybe not so much. This is 50-odd mm of turret roof armour, and so unless you're using, well, no, even a 152mm gun isn't going to do it. You need a 155mm gun to completely overmatch this turret armour, and they are not that common, let's be honest. So, turret from the front, really strong. Hull from any angle, really weak. Turret from the rear, really weak. You basically have one section of armour. It's here. Use it. Game number 1 then. Tier 9 match. We are top tier, and we're on Himmelsdorf, which is not necessarily the best map for this tank, if we're going to be honest. Flat engagements that rely on your frontal hull armour, no. Not really what this tank specialises in. Nonetheless, let's see how things pan out. So, if we have a look at what we've got on the enemy team, top tier we have an M103, WZ, Leopard, prototype, and a pair of waffle throwers. And on our team, there's me of course, an M103, a T10, and another pair of waffle throwers. Interesting. In terms of other tanks, well, the thing is, our armour is such that either everyone can penetrate me, or none of them can penetrate me, depending on where they shoot, pretty much. So, yeah. Everyone on the enemy team is potentially a threat, and that's the sort of thing you need to be thinking when you play the Conqueror. Interestingly, I just took a potluck shot at the T-32, wasn't expecting to actually penetrate him. Not sure if that shot went into the hull, or managed to find a little bit of his turret that I could penetrate, but either way, right into the front of his turret, and my tracks managed to eat the return fire, racking up a little bit of assistance damage in the bargain, which is nice. So we're up here on Castle von Himmelsdorf. Hello, Mr. RU251. There we go. 437 is a relatively high damage roll. We will happily take it. 353. We only had a little bit of his tank to shoot at the rear there, but you can see we're happily able to pick him apart. Is that Tiger 2 going to put himself in a position where I can shoot him? Come on, mate. Well, he is, but my reaction speed is so horribly poop that I'm failing miserably to take advantage of it. So that's more my fault than it is the tank's. Oh, there we go, and he spotted me. There we are. See? The gun forgives me for being rubbish, and I'm able to do some damage to him. So hopefully, so far, you are getting the impression that this is a pretty reliable gun in the grand scheme of things. You know, good accuracy, good aiming stats, good aim time, all that jazz. Good penetration, basically 260 with armor piercing. it's a good gun. And the 400 alpha damage, while again it is not the highest at tier 9 by any stretch of the imagination, is still pretty sweet, especially if you roll a little bit higher to kill the waffle thrower. Scoreline is 6-3. Can we pick up some more damage on these guys? I should think so. Hello, Mr. Indian Panzer, how are you today? And we're trying not to give the enemy much opportunity to shoot us because the armour on this tank is terrible, and when they get good shots you take damage, and there's your 7 degrees of gun depression being a bit of a problem. Now unfortunately we weren't really able to shoot, for example, the 113 or the Leopard prototype there because our M103 buddy was rather in the way, but we are able to take out the Leopard with that shot, and the scoreline is 9-4. And the M103 manages to finish off the T32, which leaves me free to abuse that Lerva. WZ-111-1-4 is just around the corner. M103 flubs his shot. I don't really care if the WZ shoots me here. If you're going to angle your plate up like that, mate, I'll just put one straight through your upper front plate. Who cares about your lower front plate? There we go. 3 kills. And the game is pretty much over at this point. We went up to the hill and we have killed them. See if we can pick up a little bit more damage on the OHO or the M103. And you can also see the mobility of this tank here. We're moving around fairly well, but that top speed limit is a little frustrating. Ah, damn, should have gone down the other way. The OHO is over there. Never mind. Jumanji! Over we go. Let's try and get some more damage in on this match. And that OHO has really done goofed, hasn't he? He becomes kill number 4, and that just leaves the M103 with 150 hit points remaining. And can we make our way through to this fellow? Come on. Sick him. Someone kill him. Oh, come on, Mr. Indian Panzer. What are you even playing at? Oh, there we go. T10 does it. There we are. Less than 5-minute match. Over 3,500 damage. Let's go and have a look at the post-game. Here we go then. First class mastery fighter. Fire for effect. None of the big shiny awards, but a fairly nice game all things considered. Finished 3rd on our team by experience earned. In fact, there were 4 guys on our team who got more than 1,000 base experience, which shows that, it's a pretty nice game overall. 4 kills, 3,582 damage, 1,071 base experience. Pretty nice. 11 shots fired, 11 hits, 10 penetrations. That is the sort of performance you can expect from this gun. And a lot of those shots were not at point blank range. Some of those shots were a good few hundred meters away. Most of that damage, about 2,500, was from fairly close range, but as I mentioned, some of those shots were from further away. 1,155 damage from more than 300 meters. 4 hits received, 2 penetrated, 2 didn't. Damage actually blocked by our armor was only 390. There was one other shot that got eaten by our tracks, that doesn't count. And the other 2 shots that were just into our side when we weren't prepared for it, well, they penetrated. 9 enemy vehicles damaged, 4 of them destroyed, 755 assistance damage, and with a premium account we made a 35,000 credit profit. That would have been a 17,000 credit profit even without the premium account. Times 5 experience for the events and with a premium account, so we walked away with over 8,000 XP, which was pretty nice, especially considering it was a 4-minute 36 match. The damage really does rack up pretty quickly from the Conqueror. That's when it's top tier. Let's have a look at a bottom tier match. As the Conqueror is a tier 9 match, of course, bottom tier is a tier 10 match. And one thing you may have noticed across both of these games is there hasn't been a huge amount of artillery. One artillery in this match, and the previous match, of course, was on Himmelsdorf, which, well, greatly nerfs the ability of artillery to do anything anyway. And this tank really doesn't take artillery particularly well, so don't think of that as a coincidence. So in this match, having a quick look at the disposition of each team, basically the matchmaker has given the enemy team a couple more TDs and they've given us a couple more medium tanks. But apart from that, it's all pretty much, there or thereabouts. Having a think about what I'm actually going to do, and ultimately I decide we're going to go to the heavy tank Valley of Death. Now, this is not necessarily where you might expect one to go in a tank that isn't overly endowed with armour for its tier, but you can make it work in the right position. So we have got plenty of tanks that are going to be better potentially in that position than we are. I mean, there's a IS-7, T110E5, a VKB, you get the idea. But we've got some other friends coming with us. VKB over there, T110E5, and that, is it a Type 4 or a Type 5? Type 4 heavy. Okay, it's the Tier 9. That's fine. So we're coming over here just to see what we can do. Each team has already exchanged a fairly early casualty. And you can just see on these gentle undulations here, I'm actually able to get shots on people without exposing too much of my hull. And just bounced a shot there from the E5. Oh, that one on the side of the pike nose of the IS-7. Ah, damn it. I should have aimed that one slightly better, but never mind. 113, put one into him. He bounces on me. And where are these guys bouncing? Well, there's one off the side of the turret, one off the top of the gun mantlet, off the turret front. So just using these gentle hills here to hide... Hello, Mr. 50B. To hide most of my hull and just expose the front of my turret, which is pretty good regardless of the tier of the tank that's shooting at you. Punish that 113 more. There we go. That 113 is not long for this world, and we actually ammo rack him right at the end to add insult to injury. Sorry, Phil, 14, but you're dead. So there's one tier 10 heavy tank dealt with, and we're just seeing if we can deal with the others. The other tanks appear to have decided this is not a particularly fun place to hang out, and that they're going to go somewhere else, which is not a terrible idea, except for the fact that they're kind of stuck there now. It's not easy to retreat from that position. That shot managed to just sneak into the lower front plate, I believe, of the IS-7, which was nice. And in this position, the IS-7 is going to struggle to do much about us without exposing that lower front plate, and this gun will go through that lower front plate like a hot knife through, well, insert your dairy condiment of choice here. Now, here you can see when they actually get an opportunity to shoot at our hull, it all goes wrong. We take one shot, can't see exactly where it went, but we take one from the IS-7 there, one from the VKB, both penetrate without much difficulty. And, yeah, so we really need them to be shooting at our turret. Hello, Mr. IS-7. Put one into him, track him where he is. VKB, well, to get the shots he's getting, he's having to really expose himself there, which is not good for his health. And we take a hit there from the T110E5. Actually failed to penetrate him. I guess I should have aimed that shot a little more carefully. Take another hit there, this time from the VKB. Now, that shot was interesting. It managed to take out my gunner. There we go, you see. Now, this is a very interesting shot. Around those areas, as I mentioned, when we were looking at the armor profile, either side of the gun mantlet, there are some regions that are sort of closer to about 260mm of effective armor. That shot was armor piercing from the VKB. He was not firing gold. The IS-7 was, and he failed to pen. He was not firing gold. That was armor piercing. I guess from where he was, maybe he has an angle down a little bit onto it. There's still probably a slightly high damage roll from his gun, so I was a bit surprised that that penetrated, but it did. We've lost our gunner. We already had to put a crew member back in, but we managed to pick up the kill, and once again, game over. That was it. Now, in that game, we took a lot more damage for our troubles, but it was still a win in the end. Let's go and have a look at the post-game stats once more. So, there we go. First class mastery, arsonist, no, not arsonist, sorry, demolitionist, fire for effect, and bruiser. Finished top of our team, 3,942 damage done, 2 kills, 1,171 base experience. All of that in a match that lasted less than 4 minutes. 13 shots fired, 13 hits, 11 penetrations for that damage count. 7 hits received, 4 penetrated, 3 did not, and it was basically if they were shooting at our turret most of the time, we were fine. If they were shooting at our hull, we were screwed. 1 enemy vehicle spotted, 5 damage, 2 destroyed, 632 assistance damage. Made a small profit without a premium account. we made a larger one with a premium account, and a respectable amount of experience into the bargain. So there we go, Conqueror brawling, if you will. You don't have to play this thing, and indeed you shouldn't play this thing hugging the red line. You should get a bit stuck in, but just be careful of what the tank can and cannot do. That would be my advice. Anyway, let's round things off in the garage. Okay then, my overall opinion on the Conqueror. I didn't like this tank at first. Even when fully upgraded, the gun just seemed to be firing rubber bullets, and it never penned when I expected it to. But the tank grew on me. My stats in it are okay, but not fantastic. But I do actually quite like it. It is not the easiest tank to play in the world. You can't just hold down W and expect to bounce all the things going, oh, I'm a heavy tank, ho ho ho. That's not going to work. You need to play to its strengths and cover up its weaknesses. You need to keep your hull covered. You need to be using that gun to pick out weak spots. You need to be taking advantage of your high rate of fire over other comparable heavy tanks, and using your DPM to punish people. If you're not doing those things, you're going to get wrecked, and you might as well play something else. So it is a fun tank to play, but you do have to be very careful in it. If you drive forwards and you get caught out in this thing and there are more opponents than you are expecting to find, you are dead. If you were to do the same thing in a Maltion, for example, you might survive, or in an ST1 or STI or whatever, but in the Conqueror you will die, so don't do that. What is interesting is that this tank is very, 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 very similar to the American M103, it's just better. So if you've played the M103 and you're going, oh god, this is painful, or even, oh, I really like this, you might want to play the Conqueror. It is better than the M103, so it gives you a very similar experience, just better. And what's not to like? Am I keeping this tank? Good question, I don't know. I think so, although at the moment it's a little bit academic because I'm still trying to hunt out the ace tanker in this machine. But I think I will keep it, all things considered. I do have fun in it, so yeah, why not? There we go, there's my little rundown of the Conqueror. To me, one of the most iconic vehicles in this game, but I appreciate I'm biased, nationality and all that jazz. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, by all means feel free to catch some of my other videos and or subscribe to my channel, and as ever, I wish you very happy hunting on that battlefield. Ciao ciao.